Hello, Heathens. Well, last week we talked about the first steps in the journey of Odin of becoming the chieftain of the gods. And we will continue the story today. We're going to look into several other aspects of him, like being a god of death, a god of poetry, the god of hospitality. So let's talk about that. Another name that is given to Odin is the blood brother of Loki. And it didn't really fit into the script, so I put it here. So Odin and Loki are actually blood brothers. So there must be a certain time when they held a sacred ritual to confirm their brotherhood. But the interesting thing is there is no story for that. Maybe it's lost in time, or it's again a hint that Germanic and Norse religion has a deeper and older story that was lost because they hadn't discovered writing up to a certain point. The only clue we find about this fact is a kenning about Odin. And a kenning is a vague description of something or someone that intentionally disguises the true name of that certain thing. So, when a skald or a poet would talk about Odin, he could call him the blood brother of Loki, and so it happens in the scriptures. But there are some scholars that argue that Loki is actually Lodur, one of Odin's brothers, in one of the versions of the creation myth. Interesting is that this brother is the one who gives Ask and Embla blood, hue, or color in one translation. And we will pick up this story when we talk about Loki in depth. The war against the Vanir is the next step in the journey of Odin. One of the major stories in the Edda is the War of the Worlds or the War of the Gods. You see, there are two races of gods in Norse and Germanic mythology. The one we know about now are the Aesir, and the other ones are called Vanir. They live in Vanheim or Vanaheim and are heavily associated with nature and magic. They're not as physically strong as the Aesir, but they know how to protect themselves and the things that they hold dear. One focal figure in the war was Gulveig. Her name can be translated into Gold Rush or Greed of Gold. And she was the starting point of the first war, and we read from the Völuspá. Now she, the seers recounting the events of the poem, remembers the war, the first in the world, when Gulveig was studded with spears in the hall of the High One, Odin. She was burned, thrice reborn, often many times, and yet she lives. She, Gulveig, was called Heidr. When she came to a house, the witch who saw many things, she enchanted once, she enchanted and divined what she could. In a trance, she practiced Seidr and brought delight to evil women. So we learn from the stanza, that's the chapter of the Völuspá, that the start of the war was when Gulveig was studded with spears and burned 3 times and was reborn 3 times. She was a woman with magical power, called Seidr, and she wasn't a nice woman. She's called evil and a witch in this text, but I think we still need some context for why she was attacked by the gods. So we read from my favorite book, The Wild Gods, from Thor Ag Bringsvard. One day a witch appeared in Asgard. Odin was not inclined to receive her, but he was and is the god of hospitality, so he had no choice but to abide by his own laws. Gulveig, that was the name of the unwanted guest, had greed shining from her eyes, gold and wealth that was the most important thing in the world for her, and she tried to infect everyone else with this love of gold. How can you be happy if you have no treasure? She drooled. These were strong words that also made an impression on the Aesir. Some were already thinking of going out for loot. But Odin saw in time where this would lead, and he warned his people. Without this witch, he said, the world would be a better place. We must get rid of her. Then the Aesir seized Gulveig, stabbed her with their spears, and threw her into the fire. But the witch was tough. When the flames had burned down, she got up again and was as lively as before. 3 times the Aesir tried to throw her onto the pyre, but each time she emerged from the fire fresh and lively. The gods could not finish her off, because Gullveig was an extremely tricky troll woman, and one who could work magic. The Aesir, however, were to deal with black magic. Their power was not to deceive and lie, but to create something new. The god of hospitality. Well, arguably not the best case here to talk about Odin as the god of hospitality, but that he is. He knew beforehand that this guest would be trouble for the gods, but either way he invited her into his home, as it was his law, and he only ordered to attack her after she worked her magic. And I think maybe that's why she couldn't be killed, because Gullveig is a curse on humanity and the gods alike. It is still a curse up to this day. Greed, monetarization, the capitalist mindset still haunts us every day. Everything has a price, everything is sold off, water, well-being, even the lives of people still have a price. And that's why she couldn't be killed. She's an idea. And when you let an idea in your mind and your heart, it can't be killed even if it's something negative. After that pleasant exchange with the Aesir, Gullveig ran to her tribe and wept and told them how brutal and barbaric the Aesir are. And so the Vanir equipped themselves for war and went before Asgard. They had enough of the Aesir beforehand, because in the eyes of the Vanir, the Aesir always made themselves very important, and because they created the world and stuff like this. And so the Aesir, so the Vanir were a bit on edge. So this situation with Gullveig put that over the top, or over the edge. So they armed themselves and went before Asgard. And so the first war of the gods began. A lot happens in this war, and many lives were lost on both sides. But after the loss of his brothers and the insight there wouldn't be a clear winner, Odin is the one that seeks a peace treaty with the Vanir. And I'm sure I will talk in depth about the War of the Gods in a different episode, but let us focus here on Odin and let us continue our journey by his side. So the war is there's a peace treaty signed, the war is over, and they exchange, how it's called, like hostages. So the Vanir will get some of the Aesir, and the Aesir will get some of the Vanir. This is actually how Freya, Freyr, and Nordir join the side of the Aesir, because they are hostages in one way or another. So let us continue our journey with Odin. Kvasir, the god of poetry. Now we make a big jump in timeline, and in that timeline are a lot of stories and sagas about Odin, but I want to focus on the major ones here. So we will take a look at the time after the second war of the gods. So there were two gods of the two wars between the Vanir and the Aesir. And this time the Vanir were defeated. This time, and Odin became the superior of all the gods. And to seal the peace and make a truce between the gods, they made some kind of ritual. They brought up a big cauldron, sometimes out of silver, sometimes out of clay, and every god had to spit in it. And the gods decided not to let it be wasted and made out of the cauldron with the spit in it a man. He would be from the Vanir race, and his name shall be Kvasir. And Kvasir traveled far and wide throughout the world, teaching mankind and spreading his vast knowledge. He was a very smart god, if it was a god, and he was the voice of reason in the 9 worlds. So it's said. And he knew the answer to any question posed to him. And his travels continued until he met 2 dwarfs, Fjalar and Galar, which invited Kvasir to their home for a private talk. Upon arrival, the 2 dwarfs killed him and drained his blood into 3 objects. 2 of them were vats or cauldrons, and the last one was a pot. And maybe you've noticed I did not talk about his name because it makes more sense now. The root word kvas likely stems from Proto-Germanic word kvas with double S, and that means something like to squish, to squash, to crush, or to bruise. Another attempt to translate this word would be from Proto-Slavic, kvass, written the same, and that is the word for a fermented drink. And ultimately, this would make sense with the oldest root from Proto-Indo-European, kvet. So kvet in Indo-European means the same thing. It's the fermentation of a liquid. And so Kvasir had his juices squeezed out of him, and the dwarf mixed it with honey to make mead out of it, or honey wine. And this is what we call Kvasir's blood. It had become the mead of poetry. It's also a name for that. Which would make anybody who drinks from it a poet or a scholar. And sometimes passed, and the gods wondered what happened to Kvasir. And the two dwarves explained that he suffocated on his own intelligence. But what does that have to do with Odin, I hear you ask? And I promise I will get there. You see, the rampage of these two dwarves didn't stop there, because their next target were two giants, Gilling and his wife. The dwarves drowned them both, first Gilling and afterwards the weeping widow. The death of his parents made their son appear on the scene, Suttungr, or Suttung, let's call him Suttung. And he knew what happened, so the dwarves implored to him and offered him the mead of wisdom in compensation for the death of his parents, and he agreed. This story has, of course, a bit more girth to it, but I just wanted to recap it for you because now another actor in the story learned from the mead of wisdom, and of course it was Odin. Kvasir was a dear friend to him, and he was the voice of reason in the Nine Worlds, so Odin wanted to bring him back. He traveled into the lands of giants. He knew that Suttung got the meat from the dwarves, and he traveled to the lands of giants and came up onto the mountain of Suttung that he probably inhabits from his parents. Note here, they were obviously very wealthy, these giants, because around the mountains there were fields that were maintained by servants. Odin, in disguise, observed the servants and saw that they struggled with reaping the weeds because their scythes were too dull. So he went to the servants and... excuse me, my voice is a bit raspy today. So he went to the servants and offered them to sharpen their tools. And that worked so well that when Odin threw the whetstone that he used to sharpen the scythes, threw it up into the air, the servants struggled for it to death and cutting each other's throats, just like Odin intended. But the servants didn't belong to Suttung himself, but to his brother Baugi, where Odin spent the night as a guest, still in disguise. Baugi in Old Norse means something like ring-shaped. And this Baugi complained the whole night that business is not going well since his slaves killed each other. Of course. Odin, who said his name was Bölverk, proposed to him to do their work in exchange for a draught of Suttung's famous mead, the mead of wisdom as we know. Baugi obliged and Bölverk worked the fields during the summer as agreed until winter. After that, they both went to the brother of Baugi, Suttung, but he refused to give the loyal servant a single drop of the beverage, like agreed. Bölverk then suggested Baugi to use a trick. He gave him a drill called Ratti and asked him to bore into the mountain. Oh God. Hnitbjörk. It's a Scandinavian word, and it's hard to pronunciate for me at least. And after Baugi tried to deceive him, a hole was actually dug and Bölverk slipped into the mountain, having taken the form of a snake. Baugi tried in vain to hit him with the drill, but Odin escaped into the mountain. He arrived by Gunnlod, the wife of Suttung, with whom he spent 3 nights. I don't know why that happened, but this is the story. Thus he could have 3 draughts of meat. So this was the agreement with the wife of Sutung, that when he spends the night with her 3 times, he could always have 1 drop of the mead, so a honey wine. But with each draught, he emptied a whole canned container. So each night he drank one pot or one of the cauldrons. And after the last night, he transformed into an eagle and flew away. And now we read from the Skatskaparmal. Then he took on the guise of an eagle and flew off as fast as he could. When Sutung saw the flight of the eagle, he also took on the shape of an eagle and flew after him. When the Aesir saw Odin coming, they set the jars out in the yard. When Odin reached Asgard, he spewed the mead up into the jars. He was, however, so near being caught by Sutung that he sent some of the meat after him backwards, so out of his bottom. And as no care was taken of this, anybody that wished might have it. This we call the share of poetasters, so inferior poets. But Sutung's meat Odin gave to the Aesir and to those men who are able to make verses. Hence we call songship Odin's prey, Odin's find, Odin's drink, Odin's gift, and the drink of the Aesir. Odin, the god of poetry. Well, now we know that Odin is in fact not a god of poetry in that sense, but he is the protector of poetry, the warden of it. With this story, he avenged his friend and the loyal servant Kvasir, and gifted the wanderers of poetry to the gods and those men who are able to make verses. Self-sacrifice. Now we will focus on my favorite story of Odin, when he finally became the All-Father. But this peak of his power didn't come that easy. He needed to sacrifice everything, even his life. And it came to pass that Odin went before the World Tree in Asgard. And it's not certain how it went down, but we know from the rune song of Odin what the aftermath was. So we read. I know that I was hanging on the windy tree for 9 nights, wounded by the spear given to Odin, myself to myself on the tree of which no one knows from which root it grows. They offered me neither bread nor meat. I bowed down, took up the runes, took them up screaming. At last I fell to the ground. 9 main songs I learned from the wisest son Böltorn, the father of Bestla, and took a drink of the precious mead drawn from S2E3. Then I began to grow and became well, I became wise. Word led me from word to word, work led me from work to work. Runes you shall learn, and counseling sticks, very strong wands, very mighty staffs. The way Fjölnir colored them, how the gods made them, as the price of counselors carved him. Odin the Aesir, Dain the elf, Dwalin the dwarfs, and the giant Alsvit. I carved some too. Do you know how to carve? Do you know how to guess? Do you know how to find? Do you know how to research? Do you know how to pray? Do you know how to blot? Do you know how to offer? And do you know how to sacrifice? Better nothing sacrificed than given too much. The gift always wants retribution, but nothing offered than too much offered. So Odin and carved it before the beginning of time. Then he rose and returned home. When he descends from the tree Yggdrasil, he becomes the true All-Father, the most powerful of all, the king of the dead and the living. And yet he feels that all this is not enough, that there can be no enough. For this restlessness has remained with him. He knows that he will never feel calm and secure, but he will keep quiet about it. Alright, there was a lot of text and a lot to talk about. So what happens here is that Odin is obviously trying to kill himself. This is suicide for every mortal, but not for him. 9 days and 9 nights he is hanging from the tree, fatally wounded by his own spear. He does not drink at the time, he does not eat at the time. What happens to a god that is on the brink of death? First things first, let's talk about the characters he meet in his delirium. The first one is Böldhorn, and he's the father of Bestla. And for those who listened carefully in the last episode, we know that Bestla is Odin's mother. So we know now who Böldhorn is. It's his grandfather, a frost giant like his mother. And his name derives from Old Norse Bölborn, meaning something like thorn of terror, the harming thorn, or the thorn of bad luck. The honey wine that they present to him in this dreamlike state is the Ötyr, and that's another name of the meat of wisdom, the meat of poetry, of the previous story. In the next verse, he talks about runes, but not in a modern kind of way, because I think most people use runes today that are carved on small wooden coins, but not in this story. They are carved on staffs, so on wands, like magic wands. The one that colored them is Fjölnir. And for all of you who think that this would be an unknown character, I have a surprise for you. Because this name is also a name of Odin himself, in his delirium. He teaches himself how to do it. Another state of his being that knows how it's done teaches him. I find that very interesting. In the next verse, he talks about all the beings that are capable of carving runes. The elves, the dwarves, the giants, and the gods. And in the last verse, or in the last verses, they read a bit like a guide. How to carve runes and what questions need to be asked beforehand. And how they are meant to be used. He says, do you know how to carve? Do you know how to guess? Do you know how to find? Do you know how to research? Do you know how to pray? Do you know how to practice? Or blót? He says, do you know how to blót? But it all could be translated into how to practice. Do you know how to offer? And do you know how to sacrifice? And after that, we read a bit of a guideline. Better nothing sacrificed than given too much. The gift always wants retribution. Better nothing offered than too much offered. And for those of you who are interested in runes, understanding what he's saying here, understanding every single word he gives us here, is important. Otherwise, rune magic can be dangerous. There are many, many sagas and stories when people use runes to heal ailments or sickness, and they carve the wrong runes, and the people get even sicker. So it's a dangerous craft if not done properly. Now we focus again on Odin, the god of death. Now with this story, Odin is becoming also a god of the dead. He flung himself into this realm on his own accord and came out of it stronger than before. He met his ancestors and another state of his being. And I have a theory how that happened. This is my own theory that I will put out here because of my past with mind-altering substances, and it goes like this. We humans are three-dimensional beings. Our soul, on the other hand, isn't. It is a four-dimensional being that inhabits a body for a certain time on a realm that we call Earth. After death, the soul will leave the body and will go back to the other realm that can be reached through different practices and different substances, or through death. In my theory, this realm is the realm of the gods. This is where our energy can be channeled when we are doing rituals, when we are doing prayers. They can be heard there, or they go up there. Following this idea, gods must inhabit this fourth dimensions, but with a body. That means that something inhabits them that can reach an even higher dimension, the fifth dimension. And this is where gods go when they die, or, as in this case, go when they are on the brink of death. They see also their ancestors, just like us after death, but they see so much more. different outcomes, different timelines where they can learn from. And I think this is what happens here to Odin. He doesn't know what would happen, but his curiosity knows no end. And the last frontier would be his death, that he willingly accepts for the knowledge that it would bring. The ultimate sacrifice, death itself. And this is why Odin is also a god of death, because he conquered it, he accepted it and welcomes it like a good friend. Now, we will go to the last saga, or the last story of Odin in my script, and not in my script, but period, or in his life, because it's the end of time. We all know how this story will end, and even though Odin tries everything to stop it from happening, the era of the gods is coming to an end. Loki not only birthed a horse, but also 3 darker children. The world serpent Jormungandr, the goddess of Helheim Hel, and the world eater Fenrir, the great wolf. Odin knew from the foretelling of the Norns that this wolf, offspring of Loki, would be his demise. And so he attempted to bind Fenrir in Asgard. And after several attempts, the gods succeeded. Odin wanted to keep the wolf close by, so he would always remember that his time would eventually come to an end. The first sign was the death of Baldur, and for the crime Loki was chained. The second sign, for the end of time, was that the 3-year-long Fimbul winter. And at the end of that winter, the chase of the sun and the moon. So in Norse mythology, the moon and the sun are not personified, but they are objects that are pulled by slates, and these slates have a rider, and these slates are also followed by wolves. And after that Fimbul winter, the wolves will catch up with the sun and the moon. And after that happens, 3 roosters in Asgard will call the alarm, and the Aesir gods and the Vanir gods will take up arms for the fight. And after that, Loki and his brood will break their chains and march for Asgard. I'm not going to tell you all the steps that lead to Ragnarök, because in the end of the season I will make a dedicated episode for it. But now, the wolf is on the loose. There is only one of the gods that will stand before him in the final fight, and that would be Odin. Because this is his destiny, and he above all knows that destiny can't be thought. The jaws of the wolf are so great that even Aesir warriors and the heroes of Valhalla are swallowed whole. We read from the Prose Edda, just a short text. When Odin goes with the wolf to fight, and Bele's bride slayer to contend with Surtr, there will fall Frigg's beloved. Odin's son goes to fight with the wolf, and Vidar goes on his way to the wild beast. With his hand he thrusts his sword to the heart of the giant's child and avenges his father. And this is the end of Odin, the All-Father. He couldn't escape his destiny, and I'm sure in the end he wouldn't have it any other way. Out of this apocalypse arises a new timeline with other gods in the High Council and with another race of humankind. This is the legacy of Odin. Epilogue. Now, we talked about the chieftain of the gods now for 2 episodes, and I wanted to make a little bit of a recap. We learned how he came to be, who his parents are, what it did take to establish a dynasty of the Aesir gods. We know who created the 9 worlds, set everything in place, and breathed life into humankind. We know about his journey to wisdom and to his self-confidence. We know why he's the god of war, the god of wisdom, the god of poetry, the god of hospitality, and the god of death. He sacrificed all he could in his pursuit of wisdom and power. He blinded himself and hung himself to further pursue his goals. He is a powerful god to have on your side, and I called upon him many times in my life, for wisdom, for knowledge, and for self-confidence. He can be a harsh teacher on your journey, but he is always a fair one. And though the rituals that I performed for him, I know that he always can be appeased with good honey wine or proper meat. Proper bread. If you want to learn the runes, he can be a great teacher, but always be thankful and mindful. Otherwise, it can happen that the blade you're carving the runes with might slip and you will cut your finger. When you're finding yourself in an unknown place, surrounded by unknown people, he will root for you and cheer you on, because this is all that he wants from you, to gain new experiences, like he always pursues. Maybe this is the true meaning of life, to gain as many experiences in this life as you can. Travel places that you've never seen before, meet people that you never met before. Talk about topics that you're not literate in, because maybe you will learn something new. And with that sentence, we are at the end, and I hope you all learned something new about Odin, a topic that was talked about many times beforehand. The last thing for me to say is goodbye, and as I said, I hope you all enjoyed the episode. There will be a lot more about the gods in this season, I can promise you that. And I would be interested if you learned something new during these 2 episodes. Please let me know either through Instagram, YouTube, or via mail at theblotcast@gmail.com. And as always, know that you are loved, you are able to love because you are love. See you next one. Take care.